Bullies mocked the obese student. He looks like a bomb, having no idea who he really was. Marcus Thompson sat alone at his usual table in the far corner of Jefferson High's sprawling cafeteria, methodically eating his turkey sandwich while trying to ignore the whispers and snickers that seemed to follow him everywhere he went. At 17, he carried an extra 120 pounds on his 6-foot frame, making him an easy target for ridicule from his classmates who saw only his size and not the person beneath. His thick-rimmed glasses, slightly too small for his round face, and his quiet, withdrawn demeanor only added to the perception that he was weak, defenseless, and utterly harmless, a perception he had carefully cultivated to avoid unwanted attention. What none of his classmates knew, what he'd kept hidden behind layers of carefully constructed anonymity and deliberate self-deprecation, was that Marcus had been training in powerlifting and strongman competitions since he was 12 years old. His father, Robert Thompson, a former Olympic weightlifter who'd competed in the 1988 Seoul Olympics and still held 3 national records, had taught him that true strength came from within, but Marcus had learned to keep his extraordinary abilities completely hidden from the world. The family had moved to Jefferson High just 4 months ago when his father accepted a position as head trainer for the city's professional football team, and Marcus had desperately hoped for a fresh start where he could blend into the background and avoid the attention that had plagued him at his previous school. That hope had been brutally shattered on his very first day when Derek Morrison, the school's star quarterback and undisputed king of the social hierarchy, had decided to make Marcus his personal source of entertainment. Derek was everything Marcus wasn't. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, perfectly styled blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of natural charisma that made teachers overlook his cruelty and made students eager to join in his torment of others. He surrounded himself with his 2 closest friends and most loyal enforcers, Tyler Webb, a lanky 6'4" basketball player with a sadistic streak a mile wide and a laugh that could cut glass, and Jake Sullivan, a compact but muscular wrestler who enjoyed showing off his athletic prowess almost as much as he enjoyed humiliating those he perceived as beneath him. "Look at that disgusting pig stuffing his face like there's no tomorrow." Derek's voice carried across the cafeteria, deliberately loud enough for half the room to hear and designed to draw maximum attention to Marcus's solitary meal. "I bet he eats more in one sitting than most people eat in an entire day. It's honestly revolting to watch." Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he continued eating with mechanical precision, staring down at his food and trying to make himself invisible. His father had always taught him that violence should be an absolute last resort, that his strength was meant to protect the innocent, not to hurt those who couldn't defend themselves against his power. But with each passing day, each calculated humiliation, that philosophy became harder and harder to maintain as the rage built up inside him like pressure in a boiler. Tyler joined in with his characteristic cruelty, making exaggerated oinking sounds that sent their entire table into fits of malicious laughter. "Maybe we should put him on a strict diet, for his own good. What do you think, Jake? Should we help our friend Marcus here learn some self-control?" "Oh, I think he definitely needs to learn some self-control," Jake replied, cracking his knuckles with deliberate menace. "Maybe we could help him with that. I know some great exercises that could really help him shed some of that excess weight." The cafeteria had gone noticeably quiet, all eyes turning to Marcus as he slowly finished his sandwich with deliberate calm. He could feel the weight of everyone's stares, that mixture of pity, amusement, and uncomfortable fascination that always accompanied these public humiliations. Some of his classmates looked genuinely uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but none of them ever spoke up in his defense. They never did. It was always easier to be a silent bystander than to risk becoming the next target. Mrs. Henderson, the lunch monitor who was supposed to maintain order and protect students from exactly this kind of harassment, was conveniently looking the other way, pretending to be deeply absorbed in her magazine while the confrontation unfolded right in front of her. Marcus had learned over the course of his 4 months at Jefferson High that most of the teachers and administrators preferred to avoid dealing with Derek Morrison, whose father was not only a major donor to the school's athletic program, but also sat on the school board and had significant influence over personnel decisions. As Marcus stood to leave, gathering his lunch tray and backpack with careful, measured movements, Derek's foot shot out with practiced precision, catching Marcus's ankle and sending him stumbling forward. The bigger boy's exceptional balance, a testament to years of intensive training that none of them could imagine, allowed him to catch himself before he fell. But Derek's face twisted with disappointment that his target hadn't crashed to the floor in a humiliating heap. "Careful there, butterball," Derek sneered, his voice dripping with false concern. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. I mean, falling down might be really dangerous for someone of your substantial size." Marcus walked away without a word, his face burning with shame and suppressed anger, but inside, something was beginning to crack. He'd endured 4 months of this relentless treatment, telling himself over and over that it would get better, that if he just ignored them long enough, they'd eventually get bored and move on to some other target. But Derek seemed to take Marcus's silence and apparent helplessness as encouragement rather than deterrence, escalating his attacks with each passing day. The harassment followed Marcus throughout his daily routine like a malignant shadow. In the hallways between periods, Derek and his friends would shoulder-check him into lockers with bone-jarring force, sending his books scattering across the floor while other students stepped over them without a second glance. During gym class, they'd accidentally throw dodgeballs at his head with vicious accuracy or make sure he was always picked last for teams, standing alone and humiliated while everyone else was chosen. The worst part wasn't even the physical abuse. It was the constant, relentless humiliation, the way they made absolutely sure that everyone was watching and recording when they targeted him, turning his pain into entertainment for the entire school. Marcus's only refuge was the weight room in the basement of the school, a forgotten corner of the building that was usually empty during lunch periods and after school hours. He'd discovered the key hanging on a hook in the gym teacher's cluttered office and had been using it to maintain his rigorous training routine, the familiar feel of cold steel in his hands serving as the only thing that kept him sane in this hostile environment. In the weight room, Marcus was completely in his element, transformed from the awkward, victimized fat kid into something entirely different. He could deadlift over 450 pounds without breaking a sweat, bench press his own considerable body weight for multiple repetitions, and perform feats of raw strength that would have shocked his tormentors into stunned silence. His thick arms and broad shoulders, hidden beneath loose-fitting clothes, were packed with dense muscle that had been forged through years of dedicated training. But he kept this secret locked away, honoring his father's teachings about using power responsibly and never revealing his true capabilities to anyone. His father had been crystal clear about the responsibility that came with his strength. "Son, with great power comes great responsibility. You could seriously hurt someone without even meaning to. You could put them in the hospital or worse with a single punch. That's why you never ever fight unless you have absolutely no other choice. And even then, you use only as much force as is absolutely necessary to protect yourself or others. Your strength is a gift, but it's also a terrible burden." The breaking point came on a cold Friday afternoon in late October, when the autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold outside the school windows. Marcus had been having a particularly brutal day. Derek had dumped an entire carton of chocolate milk over his head during lunch, soaking his clothes and hair while the cafeteria erupted in laughter. Tyler had been spreading malicious rumors that Marcus had to buy 2 seats on airplanes because of his size, and Jake had posted an unflattering photo of Marcus on social media with the caption, "Beached whale spotted at Jefferson High, someone call Greenpeace." Marcus was walking slowly to his locker after his last class, his shoulders hunched and his head down, when he heard a commotion coming from around the corner. As he approached, he saw Derek and his crew surrounding a much smaller student, a freshman named Tommy Rodriguez, who couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, soaking wet. They were tossing his backpack back and forth in a cruel game of keep-away, laughing with genuine malice as Tommy jumped futilely to retrieve it, tears streaming down his face. "Please," Tommy was saying, his voice breaking with desperation, "I need my medication. It's in there. I have to take it, or I'll get really sick." Derek caught the backpack with one hand and held it high above his head, well out of Tommy's reach. "Oh, you need your medication. What's the magic word, you little shrimp?" "Please," Tommy repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please give it back." "Wrong answer," Derek replied with a cruel smile, and with deliberate malice, he threw the backpack into a nearby trash can, where it landed with a sickening thud among the discarded papers and food waste. That single moment shattered something fundamental inside Marcus. For 4 months, he'd endured their abuse personally, telling himself that it was just part of the price he had to pay for keeping his secret, for avoiding the attention that would come if he revealed his true capabilities. But watching them torment someone even more vulnerable than himself, someone who was genuinely defenseless and in need of protection, was the final straw that broke his carefully maintained self-control. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new authority that made several students in the hallway stop and stare in surprise. There was something different in his tone, something that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around him. Derek turned around slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face like oil on water. "Oh, look, everybody. The whale wants to play hero. This is rich. What are you going to do, sit on us? Roll over and crush us with your massive bulk?" Tyler and Jake laughed with vicious glee, moving to flank Derek as they approached Marcus with predatory confidence. The hallway was rapidly filling with students, word spreading through the school like wildfire that something big was about to happen. Everyone pulled out their phones, ready to record what they all assumed would be Marcus's ultimate humiliation, the moment when the fat kid finally got what was coming to him. "Just walk away, fat boy," Jake said, flexing his muscles and shadowboxing to intimidate his target. "This doesn't concern you. Mind your own business before you get hurt." But Marcus didn't walk away. Instead, he stepped forward with deliberate purpose, and for the first time, people began to notice something different about him. His posture was straighter, his movements more fluid and confident. There was a calmness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of inner strength that seemed to radiate from his very being. "Give Tommy his backpack," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume, "and leave him alone. This ends now." Derek's smile widened with anticipation. "Make me, fat boy. I'd love to see you try." What happened next would be talked about at Jefferson High for years to come, becoming the stuff of legend that would be passed down from class to class. Derek threw the first punch, a wild haymaker aimed directly at Marcus's face with all the force he could muster. But Marcus had been expecting it, had been preparing for this moment for months. He moved his head slightly to the left with fluid grace, letting Derek's fist pass harmlessly by his ear, then grabbed Derek's wrist in a grip that made the quarterback gasp in shock and pain. "I said that's enough," Marcus repeated, his voice still calm, but now carrying an unmistakable edge of authority and barely contained power. Derek tried desperately to pull free, his face contorting with effort and growing panic, but Marcus's grip was like a steel vise that tightened with each movement. Real fear flashed across the quarterback's face as he realized that he couldn't break loose, that this fat kid he'd been tormenting for months was somehow impossibly strong. Tyler and Jake moved in quickly to help their friend, but Marcus was ready for them too. Still holding Derek's wrist, Marcus stepped back and to the side with practiced efficiency, using Derek's own momentum against him to send him stumbling directly into Tyler. The two boys crashed into a row of lockers with a sound that echoed throughout the hallway like a gunshot, their bodies making a sickening thud against the metal. Jake tried to grab Marcus from behind, wrapping his arms around the bigger boy's torso in a wrestling hold that should have been effective. But Marcus simply shrugged his shoulders and shifted his weight, and Jake found himself completely unable to get a proper grip on Marcus's thick, powerful frame. It was like trying to wrestle a mountain. Marcus turned around slowly and placed one massive hand on Jake's chest, applying just enough pressure to demonstrate his overwhelming strength. Jake's eyes widened in absolute shock as he felt the incredible power in that simple gesture, power that could easily crush his ribs if Marcus chose to use it. "How is this possible?" Jake gasped, staring at Marcus in complete disbelief. Derek scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and blind rage. "You got lucky, fat boy, but we're not done with you. Not by a long shot." "Yes, you are," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone that made everyone in the packed hallway instinctively take a step back. "You're done with Tommy, you're done with me, and you're done with anyone else who can't defend themselves. This ends today." Derek's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with tension. "We'll see about that, you freak." He charged at Marcus again, this time with Tyler right behind him, both boys moving with desperate fury. But Marcus had spent years training for moments exactly like this, even if he'd never wanted to use those skills in anger. He sidestepped Derek's charge with fluid grace and caught Tyler's arm as the basketball player swung wildly at him. With a motion that looked almost effortless, Marcus lifted Tyler completely off the ground and set him down hard on his back, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. The crowd gasped in amazement and growing fear. Tyler was over 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 200 pounds, but Marcus had handled him like he weighed nothing at all. Derek stared in shock, finally beginning to understand that he'd been catastrophically underestimating his target for months. "That's impossible," Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," Marcus said calmly, "it's just training, 5 years of it, every single day." Jake, who'd been circling around looking for an opening, tried to tackle Marcus from the side in a desperate wrestling move. But Marcus had noticed him approaching and was completely ready. He caught Jake in a bear hug, lifting the muscular wrestler completely off the ground and squeezing just hard enough to make his point crystal clear. Jake's feet dangled helplessly in the air as he struggled to breathe, his face turning red with exertion and fear. "I could break your ribs without even trying," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent hallway. "I could put you in the hospital with a single squeeze. Do you understand me?" Jake nodded frantically, his eyes wide with terror, and Marcus set him down gently. The wrestler collapsed to his knees, gasping for air and staring up at Marcus with a mixture of newfound respect and primal fear. Derek was backing away now, his confidence completely shattered, his face pale with the realization of what he'd unleashed. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked any conviction. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied with absolute finality. He walked over to the trash can and retrieved Tommy's backpack, carefully brushing off the debris before handing it to the grateful freshman. "You okay, Tommy?" Tommy nodded eagerly, clutching his backpack to his chest like a lifeline. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude and awe. "Thank you so much." Marcus turned back to Derek and his friends, who were slowly picking themselves up off the floor, their bodies battered and their pride completely destroyed. "I want to make something absolutely clear," he said, his voice carrying to every student in the packed hallway. I'm not interested in being a bully. I'm not interested in hurting people for the sake of hurting them. But I will not stand by and watch you torment others anymore. Those days are over. He looked directly at Derek with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. You've been picking on me for months because you thought I was weak, but I've been letting you do it, hoping you'd eventually get bored and move on to something else. That was my mistake. I should have stopped this a long time ago. Derek's face was pale now, the reality of the situation finally sinking in like a lead weight. You could have fought back this whole time? I could have put all three of you in the hospital on the very first day, Marcus said matter-of-factly, his voice devoid of boasting or threats. My father taught me that strength without control is just violence, that power without purpose is just destruction. But he also taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The crowd was murmuring now, phones still recording as students tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Marcus Thompson, the quiet fat kid they'd all ignored, mocked or pitied, had just completely dismantled three of the school's most feared bullies without even breaking a sweat. How? Tyler asked, still lying on the floor and nursing his bruised ribs. Powerlifting, Marcus said simply. Strongman training, Olympic-level coaching from my father. 5 years of dedicated training, every single day without exception. Turns out all that weight you've been making fun of, most of it is muscle that you never bothered to notice. He looked around at the crowd of students, many of whom were staring at him with new eyes. I know some of you have been laughing at Derek's jokes, spreading his rumors, recording videos when he humiliated me. That's your choice, and I don't blame you for it. But it stops now. All of it stops now. Mrs. Henderson finally appeared, pushing through the crowd with a stern expression and looking around at the scene with confusion. What's going on here? Why is everyone gathered around? Nothing, Mrs. Henderson, Marcus said politely, his voice respectful and calm. Just a misunderstanding that's been cleared up. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Jake grabbed his arm and shook his head vigorously. They all knew that if this went to the principal's office, the video evidence would clearly show them as the aggressors. Marcus had only defended himself and protected Tommy. He hadn't thrown a single punch or made a single threat. Is that right, Derek? Mrs. Henderson asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Derek nodded reluctantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, just a misunderstanding. Good. Then everyone needs to get to where they're supposed to be. Move along. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Derek approached Marcus cautiously, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Look, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Marcus replied, his voice steady but not unkind. You saw someone you thought was weak and decided to make my life miserable for your own entertainment. That says a lot more about you than it does about me. Derek's face flushed with genuine shame. I'm sorry. I really am. I never meant for it to go this far. Marcus studied him for a long moment, seeing something in the quarterback's eyes that might have been genuine remorse. Prove it. Not with words, but with actions. There are a lot of kids in this school who get picked on every day. You could use your influence to protect them instead of targeting them. Derek nodded slowly, his voice sincere. I will. I promise you I will. Over the following weeks, the entire dynamic at Jefferson High shifted dramatically. Derek, true to his word, began using his considerable social influence to protect rather than persecute. When he saw underclassmen being harassed, he intervened decisively. When Tyler and Jake started to revert to their old cruel habits, he shut them down immediately and completely. Marcus found himself in a strange new position that he'd never expected or wanted. Students who had ignored him for months now greeted him respectfully in the hallways. Some asked about his training regimen, others simply wanted to be associated with the legend of the day he'd taken down the school's biggest bullies. Teachers who had previously overlooked him now acknowledged him with nods of respect. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. He no longer hunched his shoulders when he walked through the halls, no longer avoided eye contact with his classmates. He'd found his voice and wasn't afraid to use it when necessary. The weight room became his official domain, with the gym teacher's enthusiastic permission. He started an after-school strength training program, teaching other students proper technique and helping them build confidence along with muscle. Tommy Rodriguez was his first and most dedicated student, and watching the shy freshman grow stronger both physically and mentally gave Marcus more satisfaction than any personal victory ever could. 3 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Derek approached Marcus in the cafeteria. The quarterback looked nervous, fidgeting with his lunch tray like a freshman on his first day. "Can I sit here?" Derek asked, his voice uncertain. Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "It's a free country." Derek sat down carefully, then looked directly at Marcus with eyes that held no trace of his former arrogance. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not destroying me when you easily could have, for giving me a chance to be better than I was." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better, even bullies, especially bullies." "I'm applying to colleges now," Derek said, his voice gaining strength, "writing essays about real leadership and standing up for others. I never would have understood what that actually meant if you hadn't shown me." "Good for you," Marcus said, and he genuinely meant it. Derek stood to leave, then paused at the edge of the table. "You know, I always wondered why you never fought back before. I thought maybe you were just scared." Marcus smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to fight, but sometimes you have to fight for something bigger than yourself." As Derek walked away, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. He'd learned that true strength wasn't about how much weight you could lift or how many people you could intimidate. It was about knowing when to hold back and when to step forward, when to endure and when to act, when to show mercy and when to show power. The shy, overweight kid who'd walked into Jefferson High 7 months ago was still there, but he'd evolved into something more. A young man who understood that power without compassion was meaningless, but that compassion without the ability to act was sometimes not enough to protect those who needed protection. Marcus Thompson had found his balance, and in doing so, had changed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. The bullies had learned that their victims might be far stronger than they appeared. The bystanders had learned that silence was complicity, and Marcus had learned that sometimes the best way to handle a bully was to show them what real strength looked like. The story of the day Marcus Thompson fought back became legend at Jefferson High. But more importantly, it became a lesson, one that would be remembered and retold long after the students graduated and moved on to their adult lives, carrying with them the knowledge that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when that ability must be used to protect those who cannot protect themselves.